The Dallas Cowboys may have fallen short in Week 1 against the Philadelphia Eagles, but let's be real, this game gave us more to be encouraged about than most people expected. Sure, it's a loss on the record, but if you actually watched closely, there were plenty of positives to take away from this battle. So today, I want to break down 5 things that stood out, and why Cowboys fans should feel fired up about the 2025 season. Let's start with the offense. Brian Schottenheimer deserves some credit here. From the first snap, you could tell there was something different about this Cowboys attack. The play calling had variety, it had rhythm, and most importantly, it had motion. Motion has been a missing piece for this team in the past, but in this game, we saw it used with purpose. That's exactly what separates creative offenses in today's NFL. The McVays, the Shanahans, and Schottenheimer leaned into that philosophy. Take Trevon for example. He was in motion on over 53% of his snaps, nearly double the rate we saw from him last season. Out of 14 motion plays, 9 came right at the snap, forcing the Eagles' defense to adjust on the fly. That's not just window dressing, that's real offensive evolution. This was just the beginning, but it showed us something important. This Cowboys offense is finally willing to adapt, attack, and keep defenses guessing. Motion is one of the most underrated weapons in football, and the Cowboys finally used it the way great offenses do. Motion at the snap? That's where the real magic happens, because it forces defenders to hesitate for just a split second, and suddenly the offense has the upper hand. Trevon's motion rate in this game wasn't just high, it was historic. It was the highest single-game motion rate for a Cowboys wide receiver in the next-gen stats era. Team-wide, the Cowboys used motion on nearly 70% of their plays, with 42% coming at the snap. To put that in perspective, last season, Dallas ranked 29th in the entire NFL in pre-snap motion. If they had played like this in 2024, they would have ranked 4th in the league. That's not just improvement. That's transformation. And this wasn't just for show. They used motion in the run game, too. On that big Miles Sanders run, Turpin went orbit motion behind the quarterback, dragging a linebacker out of position. The ball went to Sanders, with the guard and center pulling, suddenly the defense had no chance. That's not your vanilla inside zone handoff. That's smart, creative football, using the athleticism of this offensive line to open lanes. Even better, these looks built in flexibility, swing passes, RPO options, quick flats, forcing defenses to defend every inch of the field. What I loved most? The Cowboys' offense came out swinging. They weren't timid. They weren't conservative. They came out throwing haymakers. And honestly, the offense did more than enough to win this game. If the number 1 wideout had hauled in a few more key catches, the outcome might have been completely different. It's just one game, and I don't want to overreact. But if this version of the offense shows up for the next 15 weeks, the Cowboys are going to be dangerous. Now, I don't want to get ahead of myself. We've seen this before, an offense comes out firing in Week 1, looks unstoppable, and then slowly drifts back into bad habits. I remember the hype back in 2019 with Kellen Moore. It looked electric early, but it never lasted. That's why I'm cautious. One game doesn't define a season. Still, what Brian Schottenheimer showed in Week 1 was a strong, positive first step. Now let's shift to Dak Prescott. The box score doesn't tell the full story. 61.8% completions, 5.5 yards per attempt. On paper, that's not eye-popping. But if you actually watched the game, Dak passed the eye test. He looked sharp, confident, and in control. He made 4 big-time throws, the most of any player in this matchup. Pro Football Focus graded him as the highest-rated Cowboy on offense, and honestly, that lines up perfectly with what we saw live. Dak avoided sacks, kept plays alive under pressure, and went 9 for 12 for 83 yards when the Eagles' pass rush tried to collapse the pocket. That's efficient, that's poised, that's leadership. And let's not forget, this is a quarterback coming off both injury and a disappointing 2024 season. Plenty of people doubted whether Dak could still be that guy. Whether he could get back to the version of himself we saw in 2023. The raw numbers might not scream elite, but the way he played absolutely did. Bottom line, Dak Prescott reminded everyone he's still capable of carrying this team. Let's talk about the run game, because this was one of the biggest positives from Week 1. With the offensive firepower Dallas has in the passing game, nobody wants to see them become a run-heavy, predictable offense. And the good news is, they weren't. Instead, what we saw was a balanced, creative rushing attack that looked completely different from years past. Javonte Williams, fresh from Denver, brought a physical edge and ran the ball with authority. But it wasn't just him. This was about scheme. For too long, the Cowboys leaned on the same old inside zone looks. That's not what we saw here. Instead, we got variety, motions, pulls, gap runs, power concepts. The offensive line wasn't just pushing forward, they were moving, pulling, creating lanes in space. And Cavante Turpin even got touches in the ground game, adding another wrinkle to keep defenses guessing. This wasn't a vanilla rushing attack. This was layered, dynamic, and tough to defend. For the first time in a while, it feels like the Cowboys' ground game is finally catching up to the talent on the roster. Now, let's dive deeper into the run game numbers, because they tell a bigger story than the box score suggests. On paper, Javonte Williams finished with just 3.6 yards per carry. At first glance, that looks average. But when you break it down, the picture changes. 2 short 1-yard runs drag that number down. Without those, he's already up around 4 yards per carry. More importantly, Williams' success rate was 60% against a tough Eagles defense. That means on 6 out of every 10 carries, he kept the offense on schedule. That's the mark of an effective running back. Remember, yards per carry doesn't always tell the truth. A 3-yard gain on 3 RD and 2 is a win. A 5-yard run on 3 RD and 10? Useless. It's all about context, and by that measure, Williams was exactly what this offense needed. The offensive line deserves credit too. They weren't perfect, there were some missed blocks and not much yardage after contact, but overall, they held up well against one of the NFL's most feared defensive fronts. That's not just encouraging, it's proof this rushing attack is moving in the right direction. And while we're talking about positives, let's switch to the defense, because Darren Bland and Trevon Diggs both showed why this secondary can be special. Yes, there were some missed tackles, and that has to improve. But at the end of the day, corners are paid to cover, and both of these guys made life miserable for Philadelphia's receivers. Bland, in particular, was nearly flawless in coverage, locking down his assignments when targeted. This is exactly the kind of balance the Cowboys need, an offense finding rhythm on the ground and a secondary capable of shutting down elite passing attacks. Let's talk about just how dominant the Cowboys' corners were in this game. Darren Bland was locked in. He was targeted twice. Gave up just 2 catches for 11 yards. Both of those were to Saquon Barkley, not a single wide receiver caught a pass against him. That's as close to flawless as you'll see from a cornerback. Then there's Trevon Diggs. Philadelphia didn't even bother testing him. Not once. And that's despite Diggs constantly baiting Jalen Hurts, talking, taunting, trying to draw a throw his way. The Eagles didn't take the risk. That tells you everything you need to know about how much respect they have for his ability to flip a game in an instant. Look at the results: A.J. Brown, 1 catch for 8 yards. Devonta Smith, 3 catches for 16. Against most defenses, that duo is a nightmare. Against Dallas, they were ghosts. This is exactly why the Cowboys invested so heavily in their secondary. When your corners erase receivers like this, it changes everything. Now, let's shift to the run defense. The raw numbers don't look pretty: 38 rush attempts, 158 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a 50% success rate. But context matters. A lot of that damage came in the first half. After halftime, the Cowboys tightened up and looked much more disciplined. Most importantly, Saquon Barkley was held in check. Against a defense that has struggled in the past to contain elite backs, Dallas made sure he never broke free. That's a promising sign moving forward. Here's what really stood out to me: the Cowboys' run defense was actually more effective than Philadelphia's. Dallas finished with 24 carries for 96 yards, an even 4 yards per attempt, with a 42% success rate. That was more efficient than the Eagles, who struggled to get consistent production on the ground. And the inside run defense? Outstanding. Philadelphia ran the ball 12 times between the tackles. They gained just 18 yards total, that's 1.5 yards per carry. Even more impressive, they averaged negative yardage before contact. That means the Cowboys' defensive front was meeting runners in the backfield, not allowing push up front. Yes, there were some missed tackles that turned potential losses into short gains. And yes, the Eagles boosted their numbers with a few of those infamous tush-push quarterback sneaks. But the big picture doesn't lie. This front seven held its ground. According to Next Gen Stats, that was the lowest average yards before contact on inside runs for Philadelphia since 2017. That's nearly a decade of games, and Dallas just set the new standard. This wasn't just a solid defensive performance. This was a statement: the Cowboys can go toe-to-toe in the trenches with one of the most physical run games in the NFL.